Welcome back, my dear friends. I have two distinctly different things to talk about. This is not Taco Tuesday, it's Taco Thursday because we're making tacos again and we're talking about totalitarian authoritative church organizations, per usual. Like I used to for over 10 years at Pathos, when I wrote a column called No Longer Quivering about the quiverful evangelical high demand religious organizations. And there's always plenty to talk about with these guys. Sure enough, there just is. Let me just say, don't harass anybody I'm going to talk about to send them any kind of hates or anything. Don't go real live. Don't go real lives on anybody. And these are just my considered opinions. Stealing Renell Smith's moniker, Renell is pretty awesome, to say, please do your own research. Form your own thoughts on these things. Don't take what I'm telling you as a gospel truth. Go ahead and do your own research. Nothing wrong with that. So, we've had two interesting things that I've run across this week. When Tuesday hit, I was still busy talking about this gal who I don't want to talk about now because it's just a waste of breath at this point. And I go through periods of time where I have to talk about her, and then other times it's like, ooh, no, stay away. I'm going to go over here, you stay over there. I have those times. I'm going into one of them again. And the thing is, yesterday morning when I got up and spent a good hour debating a Christian nationalist guy who I've seen around and about on X, but I've never interacted with in any way, shape, or form. It's not my job to tell other Christians that they are believing the wrong thing, that they're not believing the words of Jesus. But every now and then you'll see something that comes across the board that is just so outrageous, you have to talk about it. You have to say, this isn't in the Bible anywhere. He was talking about the attributes of Jesus, okay? And if you know anything about me and my own theology, you know that I pretty much reject a lot of what Christian nationalism believes. It's not biblical, number one. And it seems to be a bit of madness that is enslaving people in the US right now. Since I'm not in the US, I don't deal with it that often here. So then when I run across it, it is always a huge surprise, even though I should not be surprised about a damn thing in life ever again. So this young man, and I'm going to call him a young man because I'm old as hell, not quite as old as dirt, but getting there, was comparing Christ to Hitler, or as I'm going to call him, the tiny dude with the mustache. Even though I know he's not tiny and he was an evil despot. So this guy was comparing the two and saying that the dude with the mustache was switched on and righteous and was just like Jesus. And he started naming these things that were just out there about the Christ that he was comparing to the guy with the mustache. He was saying such things like they were both kind to animals. Well, I don't remember any scriptures that talked about Jesus being kind to animals, even though I feel he probably was. And there were some other really bizarre things. So basically, he was trying to say that the dude with the mustache and Jesus were the same. Therefore, history had put the wrong spin on the dude with the mustache. I posted something like, surely you jest. You can't really be believing that the dude with the mustache, Hitler, is a good guy. I said, well, I challenge you to show one thing that he did that was awful. So I started talking about places like Auschwitz, like Dachau, where I had been, and the 6 million Jewish people that were unalived in those places. His response was, well, Jews are subhumans. Then he started to tell me that everybody of any color besides Lily White was subhuman. Well, I'm not exactly precisely Lily White. I'm not the darkest I've ever been, but I'm not Lily White either. And I know that from genetic testing. I'm definitely not Lily White. So I was blown away by that. Now, had noticed for a long time that this guy had within his description that he was European centric, that he supported only white culture in Europe. That's a fancy Christian nationalist white way to say, hey, I'm a racist. That is Fundy speak for I am a freaking racist. And I knew that was there, but I'd never seen it on such a large scale. So I started talking to him more about that. I said, you do realize it wasn't just the Jews that were exterminated at the camps, right? He said, oh, no, 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 it was just the Jews. So I started reading him the riot act on the other people who were exterminated by the guy with the mustaches organization. Let's just put it that way. Started pointing out that as much as 500,000 gypsies were unalived, that anybody with physical or mental disabilities they could get their hands on was exterminated regardless of their race. That so many other people groups he'd gone after and started exterminating in the camps, including all LGBTQ people from that time frame. Anyone that was standing against his fascism was unalived. It was a lot of people. And so he came back with, yes, but the guy with the mustache made the trains run on time. And he was Christian. He supported and upheld Christian morals. So I started educating him a bit more on the sins on the dude with the mustache, and he shut up. Now, did it change his mind? No, I'm sure I did not. I'm sure that he is so entrenched in his racism with this hard that that's it. No one's going to move that needle anytime soon, which is really tragic because so many people of all races have contributed so seriously to our culture, to the culture everywhere. Example, I was reading this morning that there was a black man who was a judge, who ended up being a judge in the new colonies, who was an educated, a writer, and teacher that rode with Paul Revere. But when Paul Revere went west to warn that the British were coming, this dude went north. I wish I had written down his name. But if you know anything about me, you know I'm fascinated by history. So I'm always finding these interesting little nuggets and tidbits about who invented this and how that happened. Like Hedy Lamarr being involved with coding, with top secret codes for the military. And I forgot who else it was that was involved with computers. So that's what I mean when I say across the board, there have been so many different things. And so when you start doing away with a race, you really inhibit that. And I had to point out to him that Jesus was Jewish, something that the dude with the mustache was bitterly opposed to. And I told him with his own words against Jews being subhumans. Was he trying to say that Christ was subhuman? So I think it's important to stand up and protest when these people come along and start spouting the worst, most racist ideas, and they try to justify it with scriptures. Because he was definitely trying to back up everything he had to say with scriptures and failing pretty miserably. So every time he would come back, I would come back with an answer until finally he blocked me. It's always fun. That is always fun. The second thing I want to talk about, just a minute, I don't want to dishonor the work done by a friend because I don't always understand the terminology. So I want to go back and get the correct terminology. Okay. He sent me a good friend of mine who wrote for NLQ and did a lot of things, who is still working in the field of trying to educate people. He's trying to educate people about all sorts of different things, okay? He having to do with S S S A C A. Those things you cannot say on here. Child A. Now, his own father had been treating him with the same kind of behavior that Michael Pearl is advocating, that Laurie Alexander is advocating, that so many of these people were advocating. He is calling it IC, let me pull up ICT, okay? And let me pull up his actual document. I started reading his writings to kind of help him with this and give him my feedback. ICT stands for intrafamiliar familial child torture. Okay. And it means basically what you would think. It means torture by a family member, child who is tortured by a family member, and it occurs. I think anybody who has seen my video on blanket training could see where that somebody might be getting a sick glee out of that. They might be enjoying it. That is ICT. That is ICT. People like Michael Pearl that talk lovingly about things like breaking a child's will or engaging in ICT. And my friend's writing on it, I think is going to be significant and helpful for a lot of people. I'm eager for him to give his speech so we can start talking about this stuff. I'm just introducing this just a tiny bit today. So you can start thinking about this. And he's in a battle right now trying to have this added to the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. The DSM is updated every so often, and you will see when they update it'll be like DSM dash 5 or whatever. I know we're way past 5 now. And that is something that is very necessary to happen because for so many years, so many of these disorders or syndromes were not listed in this thing, like religious abuse wasn't, domestic was not, financial. So when they started listing out some of these things through the years, it has made a landmark difference in how these things are treated, starting with law enforcement all the way down. And that's really what needs to happen too for ICT. People who are on the front lines with this stuff every single day need to realize that there is a type of CA that could qualify as ICT, what the signs and symptoms are, how it looks completely different than straight up regular CA run of the mill CA, and it comes with its own markers and better ways to treat it. Now, we didn't have that terminology back to when I was working at a residential treatment center, but we had a lot of kids there that would have fit that diagnosis so well. So I'm hoping that he gets to finish this soon because we're going to discuss it. We're going to go over it paragraph by paragraph if we have to, because I think it's too important. And he was raised in a like IFB type setting with a super hyper religious father and mother. And this is the long term damage that happens because of this. There's all sorts of things, and we're having discussions right now about that and about the difficulty of healing from anything like that. I've been open here about what happened to me from the time I was 7 to 9. I was SA'd by the family dentist and didn't have words to say to anyone in my life, like my mother or father, what was happening to me because I just didn't know those terms. Sexual things were not discussed in those days around children, so I would not have known those words at all to be able to use them. And I don't know if I'd have been comfortable telling my parents about it. Now, my school picked up on something that was wrong. Okay, they picked up on the fact that something had happened to me because I started having to go to the child psychologist, the guidance counselor at my elementary school every couple of days for, I'm sure it was play therapy, and I'm sure they were trying to get me to disclose what had happened to me, and I didn't have words for it. It was monstrous and horrible. And at that point, they were not looking for that particular kind of abuse. And I'm sure if I had disclosed, they would have had absolutely no way of appropriately dealing with this. At the residential treatment center, there were a number of methods we used to deal with these types of questions in children that happened. Multiple ways, much therapy, much psychiatric drugs, a lot of different things. And I like to think that we helped kids. Now, whether we did or not, that's not for me to decide. But that's one of the things that I find the most heinous about this kind of evangelicalism. Like the guy I was talking about earlier, who liked the guy with the mustache so much. I'm sure he's down for this. I'm sure he's down for physical discipline. And the problem with physical discipline is that it could easily spin into ICT and or teach a child a number of very negative emotions and coping strategies and do so much damage, internal emotional damage. It can teach them not to trust adults in any way, shape, or form. It can teach them the lessons of secrecy and hiding because your family is going to be going, don't tell anybody, don't tell anyone. If it's a family member who is doing these things to you, many times they will cover for the family member, the parents in the household, or one spouse will cover for the other. I've seen that again and again too. When the mother picks the husband over the child, and that is a kind of a sick, sad reality. So, kind of wrap this all up. These are the kind of conversations we still need to be having. And the more light we throw on these subjects, the better. My mother still does not know about what happened to me from 7 to 9. All she knows is I developed a crippling fear of the dentist, that every time I had an appointment to go, and I had a number because I was told my teeth were all crap, um, I would start throwing up and crying and just start physically shaking and just manifesting all these panic, fear responses. And she took to giving me half a Xanax before I went, or whatever they had back when I was a kid back in the 60s, half a benzo. And that would just knock me out so that I became a compliant victim for the dentist instead of somebody who fought him, because I did fight him at first. And, one tends to dissociate through these things. My friend and I are talking about that right now, about the terrible kind of dissociation that you get when you're experiencing hardcore abuse. And how many years later it has taken us both to unpack all this nonsense and look at it and say, okay, that was not optimal. That person should be in jail. My abuser and his are dead. Because I kind of kept tabs on my abuser for some years to figure out if he was doing this to others. And by the time I remembered enough of what the details were to disclose to somebody, it was too late. The statute of limitations had already passed in Louisiana for that, where there was no way that this guy could have been prosecuted. And it used to make me really sick to my stomach that the guy who did this to me had a building named after him on one of the LSU campuses. A great humanitarian and giver to the university and teacher who was molesting children. So there you go. I pray if anything remotely like this has happened to you in any way, shape, or form, that you get therapy. Don't wait. The sooner you start therapy with the correct therapist, and not all therapists are equal, the sooner that you can begin healing. Now, I'm not going to promise you that you're ever going to 100% heal, because I don't even know if that's possible. But I do know that you can get to a place that's not quite as awful as where you have been, where you start to let go of these things. Like I said, my mother does not know. My husband, it took until we'd been married a good 15 years before he knew about this. He knew something tragic had happened to me as a child that created an enormous amount of trauma. He did not know the why or the how. Now he does. Now he does. And you know what tomorrow is? I'm just going to shout him out. He's a wonderful guy. Even though I may grumble and gripe about him, we do have some of the funniest conversations of all time. And sometimes I can make him laugh. Like the other night, he was watching the build up to tonight's political debate, which, by the way, I'm overhearing anything about. I don't care. I don't care. I don't want to hear either side. I will go back and read later who said what. But I'm not going to watch this because I'm smart enough to know my blood pressure will go up, and I will just end up shouting at both of them because neither one of them are a candidate that I want. Um, so I'm going to be watching this from another room. So the other day, my husband was obsessively watching coverage of this again, where they were talking about ridiculous things like this morning, President Biden had a bowl of extra protein oatmeal to make sure his mind is sharp. And candidate Trump had blah, blah, blah. So they're just going overboard with this nonsense. So he was watching this, and so I asked him, what time is the debate? So I'll know when I have to be in my studio with my headphones on, listening to music with a paintbrush in my hand. And he said, oh, 9 Eastern Standard Time. I looked at him and said, "Isn't that past both candidates' bedtime?" And he busted out laughing. So we tend to amuse each other. I say stuff like that. He says stuff like that. And sometimes I really laugh at some of his antics. Like he has had to completely redo the way he eats since his cancer diagnosis, and it's been poco a poco. He doesn't always do it perfectly, but I am committed to serving him the same kind of better food that I eat than anything he's been eating for a long, long time. But he makes me laugh because he's like, "Hey, does this packet of cocoa have much sugar in it?" It's like, dude, a serving of that probably has 12 teaspoons of sugar. Read on the back. And I'm still trying to explain to him how you can read the nutrition panels on the back of cereals, foods, anything, and it will break it down for you. It will tell you how much sugar is in it, how much fiber, all of that. And he's still like scratching his head. And I keep saying, it's not brain surgery. I'm not the smartest person in the world. I can do it. And so we've laughed hard about that, and he's made me laugh with some of the things he's come up with and some of the things that he thinks about. He's quite worried about this election. I'm not, because what happens will happen. I'm going to vote, but I don't need to listen to those guys. I already know how I'm voting. He knows how he's voting. So he's just going to do it to get, quote, his fair share of abuse. He says every day when he goes to watch the news, guess I'm getting my fair share of abuse. And we don't want abuse. We just don't. That's what I'm talking about today is the kind of abuse we undergo at our churches, the kind of abuse that others try to heap us with, like this guy fighting with me yesterday trying to say that HITLER was a switched on dude. My final parting shot to him before he blocked me was Charles Manson thought the exact same thing. He even called HITLER a switched on dude, leveling the karma of these various racial groups. I don't think being compared to Charles Manson, having the same beliefs is a good thing. And it's certainly not Jesus. Okay, I am going to go. I remind you on the way out, if you hit like, subscribe, ring the bell notification, that would be awesome. If not, it's awesome too. I'm not worried about that. I just know I should be saying that nonsense. And take care of yourselves. Don't beat yourself up for the things that happened to you as a child. There's likely nothing you could have done that would have affected the outcome. Just know now who you are and be happy in that. Love you guys.